Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We've got a couple people trickling in. Thanks so much for being on time for our fabulous event for tonight. Um, People are going to just kind of trickle in. This is an Ask Me Anything. So these events are more casual than some of our other Ready Vet Go CE webinars. This one is a little bit less formal. This is going to be a conversation with Dr. Goble and you guys. Unfortunately, because it's webinar style, we can't see you. Maybe that is fortunately, if you don't want to be seen and you can just submit your questions. So we're going to invite you to submit your questions using either the chat or the Q&A. So feel free to utilize either of those. And we are going to I'll read off the questions and Dr. Goble will answer them. This is an Ask a Mentor Anything, which means you guys are the ones to be asking the questions. So hopefully you can put your conversation questions into the Q&A and the chat so that we can keep the conversation going. Just to get us started, I'm going to give a little intro. I'm going to keep it brief so that Melanie, you can give a little bit more information about yourself. But Dr. Melanie Goble is an amazing veterinarian. She's a Ready Vet Go mentor. She has been in practice for many years. She graduated in 2005 from University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has been all over the world, and we can ask her all about that. She is one of the co-founders of Not One More Vet, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She is a relief veterinarian and has experience with vet med in lots of different places. So I'm not going to go into more detail about your bio. I'm just going to turn it over to you, Dr. Melanie Goble. Thank you so much for being here. Maybe if you want to start just by giving a little bit of filling in maybe what I might have missed, some of the highlights about your bio that you want people to know.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Danny. It's great to be here. So I am, as you said, a veterinarian, graduated in 2005 from Wisconsin, started my career in Maine, and then that was a horrible mistake. And I learned a lot about what I don't want to be as a veterinarian. And then moved back home and to Wisconsin and did some associate jobs for a few years. And 10 years ago, I started my relief business, Renewed Strength Veterinary Services. And it was right about the same time that the Facebook group, Not One More Vet, started. In 2016, I started with the admin team managing the membership. And then in 2017, we actually started the nonprofit. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. If there's anything that people want to know, how you can get help if you need it, or how you can get involved with the programs and so forth. Right now, I am licensed in Wisconsin, Alaska, Kentucky, Michigan, Indiana, and Newfoundland, Labrador, Canada. I have also been licensed in the US Virgin Islands, Maine, and a emergency license in Texas. I went down and helped in Houston after Hurricane Harvey. I've done spay and neuter trips on the Navajo Nation in New Mexico and Arizona. I've trained and mentored veterinarians in Mongolia, which I absolutely love, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And I have spoken with Not One More Vet all over the US, in Estonia, and a lot of international programs. That's been a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm mainly small animal and mainly GP, but when you're the only vet on an island, you see whatever shows up, and that is always an adventure. I really probably shouldn't be seeing donkeys and roosters and goats, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And I love it. I do some urgent care and emergency as well, and just kind of see what happens. So I've had a lot of experiences with top of the line diagnostics and a lot of not diagnostics, both city and rural. Like I said, the international work and all of that. So I will say one of the most surreal experiences was realizing at 9.5 years after graduation, I was in Mongolia and I was the most experienced veterinarian in the country and had to deal with a head wound, as in literally the brain was herniating. And so I hopped on Vin and I'm like, hey, what should I do? And they're like, can you get an MRI? And I just laughed because the human MRI can't even be used at the human hospital most of the time. And they have to bring people in to use it from other countries and then send the scans out to be read. They're like, do you have oxygen? No, no, I do not. And then I asked, I was like, okay, do we have mannitol? And the vets looked at me like I was crazy and they're like, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's to help with brain swelling. And they looked at me and they're like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, well, can you call the human hospital and ask if they have it? And they looked at me and they're like, the human hospital already closed for the night. And I was like, oh, they do that here. Okay. And then a couple minutes later, they were like, yeah, we have a phone number that we can call to see if it's anywhere in the country. And Mongolia is roughly the size of the US east of the Mississippi River, but at the time, there was only about somewhere between 12 and 20 square miles of road. So in the country that's paved. So Um, if they did find any, there was a chance it could be in a city that's only accessible by plane or a 20 to 30 hour car ride. Um, and the next thing I know, they're handing me a bag of something, and I'm like, what is this? Because it's in Mongolian and Cyrillic script. I'm like, I have no idea. Might have been in Russian. And they're like, oh, well, it's mannitol. And I'm like, where did you find that? And it was sitting on the shelf of the corner pharmacy half a block away. Like, who has mannitol just sitting on the shelf? So this little chihuahua that had its brain herniating between its eyes, it had torticollis and nystagmus and just was rolling and was ridiculous. Its name was Fluffy. Um, and we had an IV in, we had some fluids running. I had given some furosemide already, gave some mannitol, gave a couple of doses, sent it home for the night because we didn't have overnight care. Came back in the morning, started dosing again. And by that afternoon, it was starting to growl at us. So I knew it was going to be fine. Um, and I ended up leaving that day and I contacted them the following week and said the dog did fine and lived and went home. And then I was working in a tier 1 trauma center, ER, here in Wisconsin, and a similar case came in with a Westie head, all messed up, brain herniating. And they did all the things. They had access to all the stuff. They had the MRI. They had all the medications. They had all the specialists. That dog died. So it is crazy when you think about what you can do and what you can't do. So one of the things I always want people to realize and to remember is that you definitely can live by that rule of, what is it, 75% of things are going to live or die regardless of what we do. Like they're generally going to be fine regardless of what we do. 5% are going to die because of what we do. 10% are going to live because of what we do. like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that whole idea that you can't always control everything, but you can control what you can and do your best, and hopefully things will turn out for you. And really learning how to really base things off of your physical exam and your history, because I couldn't do blood work, I couldn't do an MRI, I couldn't do a lot of things, but I got a lot of information from that physical exam and that history, even in a foreign language.
I love so much about that story. I love the visual that I get of you in Mongolia, and I love the takeaway and just kind of like the tale of two stories, with the trauma center here in the US and you just working with your physical exam skills and finding that bottle of mannitol and saving that pet's life. It's such a good story. I know that there's some new grads in the audience listening right now. And I think just having that as a takeaway hopefully resonates with people. That we sometimes come out of the teaching hospital with all of the bells and whistles and then transition as new grads into practices that don't necessarily have all of those things and feel a little bit stuck. And really, the physical exam is one of the most important things that we have. We are good at it. We are skilled at it. We spend a lot of time learning how to perfect that. And this is such a great example and a good takeaway that sometimes no matter how hard you try, you are sometimes not going to come out with the goal or the ending that you want. And so I just love so much about that story. Thank you so much for sharing it. I'm wondering from the group that's listening if that prompted any questions from you guys, any feedback or comments. We really want to be here to answer whatever questions you guys have. I did drop some notes for you all into the chat that this Q&A, really it's ask a mentor anything. Melanie, as I know her, is quite an open book and available to answer whatever questions you have, be it around medicine cases for those of you who are in practice and having medical cases, if you want to know about travel, if you have well-being questions, or are struggling with some of the challenges of veterinary medicine, Melanie's a great resource for that. And we really want to make sure that you guys get what you need out of this hour that we have devoted for you. So giving us questions will really help guide the conversation forward. And I don't see any just yet. And so I just want to make sure that the chat feature and the Q&A are working. And if you guys can give me like a little emoji or a thumbs up or just say, hey, I'm here. Or what might even be interesting, if you feel so bold, we would love to know where you're joining us from and where you are in your professional career. That might help. Because if you guys don't have questions and you just want to hear from Dr. Goble, I can think of questions for you. If I know who's in the audience, that will really help me know kind of what questions to ask. So if you guys feel comfortable letting me know like where you're joining us from and what year you graduated, if you're a veterinarian, and if you're not a vet, maybe what role you have in the veterinary profession. And so I'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A, and hopefully you guys can pop something in there. In the meantime, you mentioned that there was something about being on an island, and I'm wondering what you can tell us about that.
Well, every island's been a little bit different. So I've been on both St. John and St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, Kodiak, Alaska, which is an island in Alaska in the North Pacific, and most recently Newfoundland, which is an island in the North Atlantic. So they all have a very different set of issues. I think some of the craziest ones were probably down in the Virgin Islands. We had all sorts of stuff coming in. I had a cat that was brought over from the British Virgin Islands because there wasn't a vet over there either, and it had a broken jaw. And so it came over on the 4th of July. I had to meet them at the dock at the international port and bring a rabies certificate with me because they're not rabies vaccinated over there because they don't have rabies, but they need it to cross into the US Virgin Islands. So we just kind of made that happen. That was a little questionable, but what are you going to do? The cat had gotten out and came home and it was all messed up and had a fracture right on the jaw. And I I can handle a lot of things, but bones are not my forte. Broken bones make me vomit and pass out. I absolutely hate them. And I kind of freaked out. There was no other doctors on the island. There was nobody for me to call and ask for help that was nearby. I couldn't send them to a specialist because they would need to take another boat and a plane to the mainland or to Puerto Rico. Um, so I contacted an ER back here in Wisconsin and said, what am I supposed to do? Like, I have no idea. And so I placed, I believe, my first feeding tube and or esophagostomy tube, and I tried to wire the jaw, but the wire that I had, I couldn't get it to work. So I ended up finding some suture and created this like crazy figure 8 pattern going around the molars and up around the canine and kind of going all over the jaw and just kind of pulling everything together. And the cat was a cat, so it did great. We taught the owners, like we went and bought a little blender and taught them how to blend up food so that they could feed it. Um, and last I heard, the cat did great, and that was, oh well, almost 10 years ago. It was 9.5 years ago now. Um, so that was pretty crazy. I had a dog come in, a little Yorkie that was owned by a individual that was high up in politics. And apparently it was the mistress's dog or something, and a lot of things happened. And I ended up having to euthanize this dog. And the guy got my phone number after I came back to the States and called me and was like really upset about stuff. And then I found out that he had like, I don't know, lots of issues with assault and battery and domestic violence. And I was like, oh, yay, he has my phone number. Um, so he's still in my phone so that I know if I ever get a call from him, I know who it is. But that was, I euthanized his dog technically without authorization because no one would give me any direction. And I finally left him a message and said, if I don't hear from you in 20 minutes, he had been in the clinic and then left and refused to talk to me after that with no directions. And I called him and said, if I don't hear from you, I have to euthanize your dog because I cannot get it to stop seizing. It was like this little 4-pound Yorkie that had been seizing for about 5 hours. And whenever we tried to titrate off of anesthesia, it would start seizing again. And I euthanized. So yeah, sometimes you get into tough situations where you don't know what to do, but you have to do the right thing for the patient, regardless of what else might happen. Um, Thankfully, it hasn't come to bite me in the butt, so hopefully it never does. Um, Another one down there, I did a surgery to remove a rock from a dog's intestines. And as I was leaving the island, you have to go through customs in the Virgin Islands before coming to the States or coming to the mainland. And as I walk up there, I hear, hey, Dr. Melanie, how have you been going? How long were you down this time? And I was like, a month. And I'm like, how does this person know who I am? This is like the second or third time I had been down there. And turns out he was one of the owners of this dog that I had removed the rock from the intestines. And it just freaked me out. And I was transporting a cat for someone, and I'm like, well, I have a cat, I have paperwork. He's like, I trust you. And I'm like, no, but I did the work. So look at the paperwork. And like, he was just going to let me through and not actually do any of the stuff. It was crazy. And I went down another time and I get someone's yelling at me. We had just gotten onto the island. We had stopped at Walgreens to pick up something. And I hear Dr. Melanie, Dr. Melanie. And it was actually the wife and the kids with this dog. And they just wanted to tell me how thankful they were that I was there and that I had come back and that the dog was doing great. And so even though you may only meet someone and touch their lives for a few minutes or a few hours, you can really make a long-term impact on them. So those have been some good stories from there. And then, there's more from the colder climates, but those can always be saved for later if we need them.
I love those takeaways. I mean, I imagine in places like that, you really do make such a significant impact. And, it's nice to be reminded of that because there's just so many times when it doesn't feel that way. And what an amazing experience. I think we could listen to your stories all day. We've had a few people also just join, or more people are sort of trickling in. So just want to remind everyone that we have Dr. Melanie Goble here, and she's telling us some amazing stories. She is here for you guys to get your questions answered. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A. I think many people are here, Melanie, because they know about you from your work as co-founder of Not One More Vet. And I'm thinking that now might be a good opportunity if you wouldn't mind sharing with us like how that came to be and what your experience was around that.
Okay. So the Facebook group itself started October 1st of 2014, after the death of Dr. Sophia Yin, who was an amazing veterinary behaviorist and was a bright light who always seemed happy and always seemed put together and pulled together, and was such a role model and example for all of us to be who we all really wanted to be as veterinarians. We all wanted to be that person that just was so calm and made the animals calm around us and was so full of life. And her death by suicide rocked the veterinary world. Um, it was right at that same time that I actually was fired from my job with no cause, no warning, no reason. I I was shocked and was really struggling. And Nicole MacArthur, a vet out in California, started this group to just talk about the highs and lows of vet med. Um, because she realized, as a bunch of them were talking about the stresses that they were having and the thoughts that they were having about self-harm and suicide and not being good enough and all of the negative things that go through our minds when we're just not in a good place. And so she made this group, and 2 weeks later, I was invited by another vet that I met in a writing group that wasn't for veterinarians, but we both happened to be veterinarians, and we had started talking, and she invited me, and I was really thankful to have a group of people to talk about, because I was really in a low point, not knowing what I was going to do with my life, because here I had just lost my job and I'm the sole income for my family, and I was devastated. Um, and looking back, it was the best possible thing that could have happened to me. But at the time, it felt like the worst thing. So I was just in the group and I realized that they needed some help with membership. So I'm like, I can do some behind the scenes work and make sure that all the people coming in are veterinarians and all of that. So I started doing that in August of 2016. And then we started to talk, realizing that we needed a lot more. There was more than just a place, we needed more than just a place to talk. And so we created the 501(c)(3). And the goal of doing that was actually to be able to raise money and provide financial support to people that were in crisis, because it's really hard to take time off to get inpatient treatment or even just to get time off to go to therapy to begin with. And this was before you could really easily do teletherapy kind of on your own hours. So it was a really big deal, and it was a lot of work. There was 5 of us volunteers putting this together, and we went from the Facebook group and then the nonprofit with the grants program to hiring our first employee in 2020 when the world exploded on us and vet med needed NOMV more than ever, because 2020 was a massive change in the life of vet med. Like, things were hard before, but you could manage, and then suddenly you couldn't manage. Everybody was on high alert, everybody was struggling, and everyone got pets. Everyone was home with their pets, and suddenly they realized cat butts look funny. And so it wasn't just the really sick things coming in, but it was the phone calls of my cat's butt looks weird. I'm like, yeah, that's normal. Stop looking at it. Like, do something else. Stop looking at your pets. Um, and now NOMV has a board made up of 8 members. There's 10 um, staff members, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers. I don't know how many there are right now, but it is an international organization. The grants program provides well over $200,000 in grants every year around the world. There's grants for clinics themselves that have been affected by natural disasters. And then there's the individual grant programs for veterinarians and support staff. So anybody that works in the veterinary community is eligible, and they can help with financial support for housing, transportation, food, and mental health care. So they're not huge grants, they're usually 500 or less, but then they also have a lot of other resources, like being able to help you um, get somewhere in budgeting. So um, YNAB, you need a budget. They can get you a subscription to that for a year. Um, there's a lot of different things that they have as far as finding local and national resources, international resources. Things that you can do to get involved with NOMV, you can actually go to nomv.org and sign up as a volunteer right there. There's a couple steps to do it, but we generally have people start as ambassadors or advocates, where you actually plan a program in your area. Maybe it's collecting treats and sending those over out to clinics, or sending thank you cards to clinics. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do fundraisers. Fundraisers are always necessary. There's not enough money for the grants program. Like, every dollar that we get in, we could use another $500, because we go through a lot of grants. And I believe right now, I was just working on it for a lecture, and less or greater than 95% of our credentialed technicians, and I would say 95 to 100% of the rest of our support staff, live or receive a wage that is less than a living wage in the United States. Many do not even make poverty level wages at this point. And it is so disheartening. Like, I know veterinarians are always really worried about our costs, because vet med is expensive, being our student loans are expensive. There's a lot of expense there. But literally, our support staff is not even one paycheck away from being destitute. They miss 2 weeks of work. You lose work because your town just got destroyed by Hurricane Helene. At this point, like, yeah, their house is gone, but they have nothing to rebuild. They may not have had money to have insurance. And as it stands, most of the people in North Carolina that were affected by the floods, they didn't have flood insurance, because you don't think you're going to have a flood in the mountains. So they're not getting coverage. The vet clinics are not getting coverage. So they're not being compensated or getting insurance for their clinics that are destroyed, or for clinics being closed. So those are all things that NOMV could use help with, and other organizations that need help could really use that as well, because there's a lot riding on paychecks in vet med, and even that, it's not enough to handle one broken car or a sustained illness. It's really upsetting, but I don't want you to think that like everything's bad. We are doing a lot to make things better, and we've made a huge difference for a lot of people. But those are all things to look at when you're looking at your clinic, and yes, you want a raise, but do you need a raise, or does your staff need a raise? I know at one of my jobs when I was an associate, there was some financial issues at the time, and I chose to actually take a pay cut so that the staff wouldn't lose their jobs. Now, that's not something that I expect everyone to be able to do or to want to do, but it is something to think about when things are getting hard or if you know that your staff is struggling. So that's a little bit about NOMV and a little bit about me. They do have some other programs like Clear Blueprint, Lifeboat, which is an asynchronous, anonymous, peer-to-peer support program. Clear Blueprint is the certification program for clinics that allows them to actually walk the walk and not just talk the talk. It's a living certification that can be taken away if you don't actually continue to grow and improve, which has been really exciting. There's a cyberbullying task force, and there's groups that meet for virtual support sessions, and mental health support sessions as well. So there's lots there. All of them can be found on NOMV. You can donate there, you can sign up to volunteer, you can look for help there. But that's kind of where that goes. I'm not seeing any other questions, but I was going through the RVG community questions the other day, and there was a lot of people saying that one of their big concerns and why they're in for mentorship and so forth is time management, and client communications. So I thought if you want, I can ask you guys a couple questions about that and then talk about some of the ways we can improve that. So my first question for you is, where are your main pain points for time management and or client communications? The kind of tough communication discussions. Is it the quality of life talks? Is it the bad news talks? Is it finances? Is it how to get them to shut up so you can leave the room? How is it that you say, I don't know the answer? Um, and you need to look for you need to look something up. How do you make time for that? Um, are any of those things that you guys would be interested in talking about or hearing about?
I think we should just give it a pause and let everybody I'll give you guys time to chime in while you mull all of that over. Um, Thanks so much for sharing all of that about NOMV. I dropped the link into the chat where you guys can go to learn how to volunteer or donate. So feel free to keep your questions. We can bounce around and do NOMV questions still. But somebody did drop into the chat that their client communication discussions that were challenging are around long, expensive discussions like allergies. And I'm just laughing because we all know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you for dropping that one into the chat. So that one
Yes.
on
So that one, I will actually say the allergy conversations are one of my favorite conversations to have. And I take it a couple of ways. So you have to remember that allergies patients are going to be in all the time. So that is where I start. So I say, hey, Mrs. Pet Owner, Mr. Pet Owner, co-pet owners, whatever you want to call them. We'll just call them Sam and Jeanette. So Sam and Jeanette, I know you have Fluffy here, and this has been really, really frustrating. It's been going on for a while, right? And they say yes. And then I say, I'm really concerned that we may be dealing with allergies. And then I ask them if they are familiar with allergies, either for a pet or for themselves. If they are familiar with allergies, it's going to make life a lot easier because that is when you let them know. And if they say no, you're still going to say the same thing. But allergies are a lifelong problem. It is something that we manage and we try to keep under control, and we'll have to treat flares when they happen. But if we are on top of it now and get to the bottom of what the allergies are, and if we keep them under control, we can avoid a lot of the flare-ups most of the time. And when we know what the causes of the flare-ups are, we can catch them earlier rather than waiting until they're so bad that they're a lot more expensive to manage. So that's where I start things because we have to set that explanation or expectation that allergies are hard, they're never going away, and they're expensive. So that's where I start. And then depending on the type of allergy symptoms that they show and the type of allergy that they have, then I go into those specifics. And a lot of times I'll say, today the allergies are showing up as a skin infection and an ear infection with a lot of itchiness. So I'd like to start by treating the infection of both the ears and the skin. And that's going to be a month-long worth of treatments for the skin. The ears will be dependent on what we're using for that. And we're really going to need you to stay on top of this. We're going to address it a couple of different ways. Some is with medication that you're giving by mouth. Some is with topical treatments. Now, what are your limitations? What are you able to do or not do? I want them to be part of the decisions for how they're going to be doing stuff. Now, if you get someone that they cannot medicate, well, then we're going to have to go really heavy topicals and we're going to have to potentially do injectables and then food. So if we know that there's a food issue, or if we need to do a food trial, etc. I mention food trials at the beginning. And then I say, if this is something you want to start, we can start a food trial now, or you can really think about it and talk about it with everyone in your household, because if everyone's not on board, it's not going to work. So we need everyone to be in on the team for this. And then I say I want to recheck them in 2 weeks and I want to recheck them in a month. So each time I see them, I give them more information. A lot of times I will do handouts right away, whether it's in giving them in person or if we email them. And I ask them if they want that all written, if they want to talk about it. I do try to get as many people in the office for those conversations as possible when we need to have them, because otherwise you end up having 4 people calling to go over them, and those are really frustrating and very, very time consuming. And then I really go over what the options are. Are we doing Cytopoint? Are they old enough for Apoquel? Is there anyone in the household that's allergic to cephalosporins? Like, I'm allergic to cephalosporins, only a mild anaphylaxis, but I can't even be in the room when it's being filled. So I want to make sure that no one's going to die from the medications I'm prescribing. And then, can they bathe the animal? Can they do a mousse? Can they do a spray? And then we find out what's going to work for them. But the really big things are making sure that they know it is lifelong, that we can do what we can, but it tends to be expensive. If we can control things with food, that's great. But we may need to do other things like the long-term Apoquel or Cytopoint or whatever. And most of the time, once they're on board as being part of the team, it works really well. Does that answer your questions, Kaylin, or is there more that you'd like me to cover for that?
While she's typing, I'm going to say that that was just such a skilled answer, and I took some stuff away from that. So thank you for sharing. I feel like, the veterinarians in the group will probably have taken some things away. I love the idea of using curiosity, making the pet owner part of the plan, asking them straight away, like, what are they able to do and willing to do? It's such an important question. And then really valuing their experience. If they already have experience with allergies, you can meet them in a different place. And I love so much of what you had to say in that answer. The question asker just replied that that she feels like she tries to do similar things and breaking it down into multiple consults. Yes, I love that too. Multiple consults, because they're time consuming. They take a long time. So I think if you set the expectation with the multiple consultations, then you're ahead of the game.
Not to mention, people generally only remember about 10 to 20% of what you say during an appointment. So you can give them the most skilled and amazing answer, and they're not going to remember it. And then they're going to be upset because you didn't tell them, even though you did tell them. So that is nice to be able to send home discharges, and having those papers to send home or to email to them. That can be really helpful. So.
Thanks. We have another question for you. How do we manage the invisible labor that comes with the day while also managing time when it comes with work in patients, and urgent cases?
Yes. So, one, recognizing what the invisible labor is as you're going. So, like, one of the things that I will do when I'm at a clinic, so as a relief vet, I never know necessarily um, what the routine is at the clinic, or some of the things that the staff doctors know and the technicians know, this is what everybody does. I don't always have that. So I have to sit down and I actually make a list of the patient, and then, what are the things that I need to do? So I have the exam, I have my medical record. I put down diagnostics, which diagnostics I have, mark down what the um, mark down that if I've received them or not, and if I have to call the owner or do any follow-up. I put all of those on my little slip of paper so that I can cross them off and I know that I'm actually done. Because then when the staff comes to me and says, "How can we get one more patient in or five more patients in? Can we fit this in? Can we fit that in?" One, I look and see what do I still have to do. And two, I actually go back and ask the staff. I say, there's XYZ wants to come in. Where are you at? Is this something that you guys are able to handle? Because they have to be able to do those diagnostics that I request. They have to have enough staff to be able to have one person doing blood work, one person or two people or whatever getting x-rays, the next one getting the next patient in, somebody else filling the meds. Like, we need to make sure that the staff are not overwhelmed as well. Now, sometimes it's easier to say yes or no than other times, but those are some of the things that I look at. So those invisible labor items. I really try and plan that out. If you're in RBG for the workshops and so forth and doing um, the units, there's going to be a lot of really good examples of how to delegate and how to streamline stuff like scheduling phone calls. Um, one of the things I do tell people, if we have a hospitalized patient, I say either myself or one of my technicians will call you with an update later. So be ready and waiting for our call. Make sure you don't just let it go to voicemail. If it does go to voicemail, please listen to it before you call back. And if they do call back, I always ask, did you listen to your voicemail? And if they didn't, like, I have the receptionist ask them to listen to their voicemail, and if they still have questions, to either email the questions or call us back with those questions, give them to the receptionist or to the technician, and then someone will call them back. So I try not to interrupt the day with those questions that are coming in, because every time you get distracted from finishing with one patient, it takes 10 to 15 minutes to get back on track to where you are with that patient that you were working with before. So scheduling times for those phone calls, scheduling time for any type of follow-up, meeting with your staff to really set out in the morning and then right after lunch or right before lunch to kind of plan what the rest of the day is going to look like. If you have multiple staff members at your disposal who's going to be responsible for what, so that if I have a question with blood work, I know who to go with to that, or who to go to for those questions. Does that answer your questions on that, managing that invisible labor?
I'm going to give her a second to answer, to see if she has any follow-up questions. But even when you just said, that you'll leave a message and someone will call back and you have to ask the CSR to ask them, did they listen to their voicemail? I felt the thing happen in my body that happens when I'm in the clinic. It is just the bane of my existence. And I feel like many of us can relate to what you just said.
Right. So I do try to leave a very detailed voicemail. Some people will just say, oh, this is Dr. Melanie, call me back, I have an update. And if it's something that I need to physically, like I need to have that conversation and can't leave it on voicemail, then I just ask them to give me a call back. But 95% of the time, it is completely okay to just go through the blood work, go through everything, and let them know, yes, you have to come in and pick up some medication, or everything's great. We're just going to recheck things in 3 months. Call us if there's any problems. Like, those are all reasonable. Kind of another thing, kind of playing on that, is calling with blood work. So as veterinarians in school, we are used to having to go through every single abnormal and say what the differentials are for every single abnormal. What I recommend with blood work is to say something along the lines of, we did have some abnormalities on the CBC and the chemistry. And there's a couple different things that could be going on, but the most likely thing, based on bringing all of this together and on Fluffy's physical exam, is that Fluffy has kidney failure. So you don't have to go through the anemia, the BUN and creatinine both being azotemic. You don't have to go through the potassium and the phosphorus being off. Like, you can just say, bringing them all together, we have this. If you'd like to see the individual results, here you go. Like, we can send that to you via email or whatever. But you don't have to go through every single thing. Now, sometimes, let's say we have an anemia and just kind of a slight elevation of BUN and creatinine, but not enough that we're like, oh, this is like end stage renal failure. We can say, we have a few things going on and we may have some additional testing that we need to do. I'm concerned about the kidneys. They're a little bit elevated, but the anemia is a little bit more than I would expect. We might be dealing with cancer or XYZ other problem. I would like to do these additional diagnostics. Alternatively, if that's not an option for you right now, we can recheck things in a month or 2 months and see what's changed. Making sure that people have an option if there's not an easy answer for them, or yeah, you have to treat this or nothing. Remember that spectrum of care is really, really important. And that's really hard coming from school, where you're generally looking at a tertiary care situation where most people are ready and willing to pay for anything and everything, but able to actually say, okay, this is what we have going on. This is what it would cost to do these things. If that's not possible for you right now, we can talk about what the available options are moving forward. And once again, having them be part of the discussion for diagnostics and planning. All of those things are going to be really important.
Yeah, also really, really great tips. I'm confident people are taking away some awesome things from you. Any other questions for Melanie around the specific areas of connecting with or communicating with clients or managing your time? As she said, the Ready Vet Go community is where we have a lot of networking and people ask questions, and a lot of the new veterinarians in our current cohort in our mentorship program are asking a lot about that. So I have dropped some links into the chat for the Ready Vet Go community. You do not need to be part of one of our formal mentorship programs to have free access to the community. So feel free to follow the links to join. You'll find out about all of these events that we have, and you can also take advantage of networking and asking questions in the community. So we have about just under 10 more minutes left with Melanie. So we've covered a lot today, talking about her travels and amazing international veterinary adventures, Not One More Vet, client communication, time management. So anything is on the table here. So if you guys want to circle back to anything, you're welcome to. So please feel free, if you have last questions, to drop those into the chat so we can make sure we get all of your questions answered before we go for the night. And as a reminder, all of our events are always recorded and they're available on demand in the community, so you can watch them later as well. Anything you were hoping to be asked, Melanie, that hasn't come up?
Oh, I don't know, but I will say there's a little game that I'll sometimes play at my clinics, because everybody always is like, where do you come up with these crazy stories? And they swear I have a story for absolutely anything and everything that anybody could possibly ask about. Some of them are, public appropriate, some are not, but um, one of the games we play is I actually have people come in and I'm like, throw a word or a phrase at me, and I bet I have a story. So even if you're like, I don't have a specific question, but I want to see if this is true, go ahead and throw something at me and see. I also have lots of information and experience with working with chronic diseases, personally, not just for patients, how to manage traveling and moving to different places and experiencing different stressful things and all of that. Let's see, we just have another one come in. Do you have any tips to be resilient in the face of a career as a veterinarian? Ways to reduce stress and guilt? Yes. So I have actually given multiple hour-plus long lectures on these topics, so I'll try to be quick. So resiliency in the face of being your career, one is learning to fail, which sounds really, really hard, but we're all going to fail. It's always going to happen, and it's learning how to get back up again. And so the titans of industry will often say, fail forward, fail often. And I'm like, dude, when I fail, somebody dies. Like, failure is not an option. But I had to rethink the way I thought about that. And honestly, we fight death every day. And most of the time, we win. Unless you're an emergency, in which case you win a little bit less. But the wins that you do have are amazing. So one is knowing that if you're doing your best, that's all you can do. And some days your best may only be 10% of your normal, but if you're giving that 10%, that is still 100% of what you were able to give at that moment. So recognizing that is huge. Two would be having a support system, which I know can be really, really hard because vet med can be really isolating, especially early in your career, because you're so busy learning to be a vet that you don't always have time for stuff outside of vet med. So not necessarily becoming best friends with your coworkers, but having good relationships with them is really important. Learning about emotional intelligence. There's two great books, Emotional Intelligence and Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that talk about this. And it's all about recognizing your own emotions and being able to name them and recognize them, recognizing and being able to name the emotions in others having empathy with boundaries, and controlling your responses to your emotions. So you cannot control your emotions. Emotions happen and they are not controllable. But the actual response that you have them is under your control. So emotional intelligence, um, social engagements and connection. I don't like the term work-life balance because it's not really a balancing act. It is really just reaching what you need in your life at any given time. So there's times you need more rest. There's times you can put a lot more into work. There's times you have to focus on your family. But you do have to make sure that you are feeding all parts of you emotionally, physically, spiritually, all of that. You have to feed it all, but you can feed different amounts at different times. And so watching that, I also really like the book, The Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Knowing how you accept appreciation and how you give appreciation, and knowing how your coworkers give and receive appreciation is also really important, because you can think you're doing everything right and like saying or doing the right thing, but if that's not the way that other person feels appreciated, then that's when you start to get a lot of discontent. So that's another book I really like. I personally am a words of appreciation and acts of service. That's both how I receive and how I give appreciation. Um, and that I've had places where they just think it's gifts. And gifts to me, like, yeah, I love getting a gift, but I'd really rather have someone say, "Hey, Melanie, I really appreciate the way that you stepped in and helped calm down that client that was really upset. That meant a lot to know that you were in my corner." Like that is more fulfilling to me than getting a $25 gift card. Um, the other thing that's really important for resiliency is knowing your personal core values and knowing what goes against them. Because if you're being made to go against your core values, or you're being treated in a way that goes against your core values, you will not be happy in that scenario, and you will be at war with yourself or with where you're working. So that is something to be really in tune with. And then kind of ways to reduce that guilt and stress. One is, if you're taking care of yourself, stress is going to be significantly easier to handle. It's not necessarily going to be less stressful, but it will be easier to handle. Guilt is a hard one, because I mean, I was raised pretty Catholic, so I was raised with guilt. But one of the things, like one of the most common things that we feel guilty for is when we fail. And so once again, going back to that learning to fail and learning from it. So if something dies under anesthesia, one, you look at that, you go through it with a colleague, and you do your postmortem and say, not necessarily on the patient, but on the situation, and see what you can learn from it. Um, there's another book, and it's the Checklist Manifesto. That is a great one. It actually is how checklists changed human medicine and aviation and a lot of other career paths and so forth for the better. But that really helps you see how you can prevent things from happening again. So that can really help with guilt. And then also looking at it and saying, okay, if you had a patient die under anesthesia, let's just say it was for a spay. How many spays have you done? And out of the last 100, how many have died? Just that one? That is still a 99% success rate. And we are a group of perfectionists. So even 99% is still pretty good. Like that one still sucks, don't get me wrong. You're still going to be sad. You're still going to hurt from it. But that is it's a place to learn, and it's something to grow and move on from. But you still are doing great with that 99%. My own cat died after the RNA that I did failed, and it still sucks. I mean, I killed my cat. Um, I've done more RNA since then, and I was scared to death because, of course, it was one of the technician's cats. That cat's doing great. Um, the guilt, you're still going to have guilt. It's just a matter of learning from it and moving on. Um, it's Yeah, it's just learning how to live with it. I wish I could say I had a magic recipe to make it go away, but talking to other people that have been through it can really help. And then, like I said, going through the step by step, what happened? Is it something that you did? Is it something you didn't do? Is it just the unfortunate luck of the draw or bad luck of the draw, as the case may be? Just because something bad happened doesn't mean it was your fault. So remembering that is really, really important. Does that
That
answer
was
the
a
question?
really great way to end. Hopefully the question asker can drop in if that helped, or if you have any follow-up questions. We are kind of at the top of the hour. So for those of you who need to step off, thank you guys so much for coming. This is a really great discussion. I love what you just had to share about resiliency. And I also love the really like vulnerability of sharing about the loss of your cat. I'm so sorry that happened. And then, whoa, there goes mine. It's dinner time. And then also telling us that you then did another RNA on not just anybody's cat, but your technician's cat. And I think,
And she was in surgery with me. I was just like sweating bullets.
yeah, I imagine. And I think it's so important for the new and early career veterinarians who are on this call to hear that from you, because mistakes happen. That very likely was not even a mistake, and it just happened. Bad things happen, sad things happen, and yet there are a lot of us who are very happy in this profession years later, getting up and doing it again. And it's hard and it sucks, and yet
It's
here
still
we are,
amazing.
and it's
And it's
still
wonderful.
amazing.
And it's
And
horrible. And you can feel so many emotions at one time. It doesn't mean any of them are invalid. It just means that you're human and you can
exactly.
experience a lot of things at once.
Exactly. I love that you shared all of that. So yeah, Kaylin says her question was answered. All of those books, you guys, that Melanie was naming off, I dropped into the chat. I think I got all of them. And I just want to thank everyone for coming and staying all the way till the end. You guys are amazing. And Dr. Melanie Goble, thank you so much for being here, for your incredibly thoughtful answers about so many different things. This was a really fun event. This will be available for you guys to watch on demand in the community. Thank you guys all so much for coming. Thanks, Melanie. Have a
Thank
great night.
you. Have a good
Bye,
night,
everyone.
everyone. Bye bye.